Good morning to everybody, and welcome. And Mike and Julie, thank you so much for kicking us off this morning. Would you please join me in thanking the Buckley Air Force Base Honor Guard who joined us today to present the retirement colors. We are so proud to have them here. This is a really very, very special morning for all of us. A very special Tocqueville breakfast where we not only get to hear from somebody who I have admired and had the pleasure of working with for so long, we get to hear from Senator Bennet, who we know is fighting for us and representing Colorado every single day. But we're very, very happy when you're home where you actually belong, Senator, I must tell you. And after the Senator's remarks, we are very honored to recognize again a very special friend of ours, Dale Tabor, who served in the U.S. Air Force for 30 years before passionately serving us for 21 years. My whole goal today, Dale, is to get through this without sobbing through the entire thing. But I now have a very, very distinct pleasure. There are so many joyful things about being the CEO of the United Way, but this one is really very special, where we get to welcome truly a dear friend of the United Ways and all of ours, Senator Michael Bennet. And you know that the Senator shares Mile High United Way's passion for education, and that is how I got to first meet the Senator. Before his appointment to the Senate in 2009 and then subsequent election to a full 6-year term in 2010, Senator Bennet served as superintendent of Denver Public Schools, where he led a very bold and inclusive reform effort that improved student achievement, helped turn around some of our most challenged goals, and brought to a halt a seamlessly ending cycle of budget cuts. What is happening in Denver Public Schools right now, and the results that we're seeing, and the amazing Denver plan, and everything that is happening and that United Way is proud to be a part of, happened under your leadership, Senator. You also know that prior to his time at DPS, the Senator was widely credited with balancing a historic budget deficit and implementing innovative reforms as Chief of Staff to then Denver Mayor John Hickenlooper. And in that role, is there a theme here? He also implemented innovative reforms that made city government more responsive to the community needs and concerns of all of us. His experience in saving jobs, turning around failing companies, and just being a kind voice of reason is exactly what we need in the U.S. Senate right now. He continues to make great strides for Colorado, for the country, and I am deeply, deeply honored. Will you please join me in welcoming our Senator, Michael Bennet? Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's wonderful to see all of you. I've never been in this building. I have been in the old building many times, and this is a lot nicer. And I want to thank you all for making such a difference in the lives of Coloradans. We are grateful for your generosity, for your time, and for your support. Thanks in particular for the team that supports home energy assistance for families that need it. Enrique, Stephanie, and Deidre, thank you. We had a photo taken earlier today. Thank you for everything you do. And Major General Tabor, congratulations. Congratulations for 50 years of service to our country and to our community. I'm honored to be here to be part of that. Let's give him a round of applause for setting an example. I want to thank Christine and Jareen Peterson for collaborating with DPS on 2 new centers for family opportunity. The centers provide free GED classes, tax, and financial coaching. Kudos to Aaron Medina for developing Bridging the Gap, which changes the lives of young adults in the child welfare system. Bridging the Gap supports young adults as they transition to adulthood. A lot of thanks today. Great job by Stephanie Sanchez in the effort to expand the 211 database to provide information for immigrants and refugees. Our constituent advocate, Priscilla Resendez, will work closely with the mayor and your team to make sure we get the full benefit of it. Your work to promote financial stability for working families is essential. Teaching financial literacy at your opportunity centers goes a long way. Earlier this year, we learned that for the first time in this country's history, a majority of our public school children are poor enough that they qualify for free and reduced lunch. And last July, we passed a fixed to No Child Left Behind, and you included a provision to provide states flexibility to spend funding to support early childhood education, a provision to allow states to use funding to build infrastructure to help early childhood providers share services similar to the work of the Mirage Foundation, and to provide support for rural schools as well. But we've got other places we need to continue to act. We've got to make the child care tax credit permanent and let it grow with inflation. We've got to make the improvements to the earned income tax credit permanent. We have to ensure the child and dependent care tax credit actually reflects the increasing costs of care that parents face. We need to update our tax code to make it more child care affordable. And our office looks forward to working with you on all of those. But I want to mostly thank you this morning for your partnership with the Denver Public Schools. It isn't thanks to me, it's thanks to a lot of people in our community who stepped up starting in about 2005 to say, we need to make a big difference here. Because in this country, if you're born poor in the United States today, your chances of graduating with a college degree or its equivalent is roughly 9 in 100. Which means that if we don't change the way we deliver our K-12 education and early childhood education and make college more accessible, 91 out of 100 of our kids that are born poor are going to be constrained to the margin of the economy, the margin of the democracy from the very outset. That's what's happening in the United States today. And the longer I've worked on this stuff, the more simple it has become. We have to find a way to fill that gap in the early years. You know, when kids show up to kindergarten having heard 30 million fewer words than their more affluent peers. And then to find that in cities and rural communities across America, there are entire cities and entire towns that no one here would send their, that don't have one school that anyone here would send their kid to. And then college has become so unaffordable that if you can get there and get in, you are guaranteed a life of having to repay that debt. I'm meeting people out in the state who are just finishing, getting to the end of paying off their student loans and now have to pay their kids' student loans. And it's not too much to say that if you have that 9% that are going to college and the rest are not, that system of education is actually reinforcing the income inequality that we have in this country rather than unshackling people from it. And we are fortunate indeed to live in a city where that's less true today than it was a while ago because of all of your efforts. Denver is now the fastest growing urban school district in America. We were dead last in 2005 in terms of student growth. The last 3 years, we have led the state in terms of student growth. Our free and reduced lunch kids in Denver are growing faster than the free and reduced lunch kids outside of Denver. Our non-free and reduced lunch kids in Denver are growing faster than the non-free and reduced lunch kids in the suburbs of Denver. That's amazing. Don't tell anybody in Cherry Creek. But it's true. It's true. And this year we graduated and sent to college 30% more people than in 2005. So I'm the first to say we have a long way to go to make sure that the zip code you're born into in Denver doesn't guarantee the education you're going to get. We're a long way from that, but we would be feeling a lot better as a country if every urban city in America could say that they're sending 30% more kids this year to college than they did in 2005. And I know the school district couldn't possibly have done it without partnership with the United Way and our other partners to lean in and say, we're going to do something different for our kids. Well, I am working very hard back in Washington to try to focus our attention on our children and the next generation. We do not have voices there that are talking about our kids. We're not organized to think about our kids. If it were up to me, we would have a committee in the Senate whose only jurisdiction was the children of the United States of America. And we'd take away the jurisdiction of the Finance Committee and of the Health Committee and of this one and that one, and we'd say, let's organize our thoughts around the thing that's the most important, which is the next generation of Americans and the generation that's coming after that. You guys are truly an inspiration to me for the work that needs to be done back there. I'm so much happier here than I am there. And I want to thank you for including me today in this celebration. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, the most important thing that I forgot to mention is that the senator also is an amazing father of some pretty special little girls as well. But the senator is very kind, and we'd like to, before we do a special presentation for Dale, open up the floor to a conversation with all of you.
Great.
So any questions, please?
On any topic, don't feel the need to restrict yourself to any. Hey,
Ben Lewis.
there's Ben.
Why am I not surprised?
We're out of time.
I have a daughter-in-law who is a high school teacher, so I hear a lot about Common Core and about testing, and I'm trying to understand better what you think the role of the federal government is versus the local control. It's a little murky to me.
Yeah, great question, and I'm glad your daughter-in-law is teaching. And by the way, these little girls, one of them turned 16 this week. Impossible to believe. And actually, Susan, I couldn't be prouder of her. I mean, I hope the next 16 years go as well as the first. For her and for me. It's such a great question. So I have had a long-standing debate with among other people, my friend Arnie Duncan, who's the Secretary of Education, because I have long believed that the testing for accountability purposes, and particularly for federal government accountability purposes, should be distinct from the testing that we do for teaching and learning. We have conflated those two things in this country, and what that has meant is that we are over-testing for accountability, and we are under, and our testing for teaching and learning is less sophisticated than it needs to be. We're carrying too much freight. And this was one of the reasons why I included an amendment in the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, which is now called something else equally uninteresting. Every Child Achieves Act, I think is what it's called. By the way, this is a bill, at a moment when we were riven with partisanship back there, this reauthorization, which came 7 years after it was supposed to be passed, passed out of our committee with unanimously. It was an incredible testament to the leadership of Lamar Alexander, the chairman of that committee. This is a committee that has on it Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders, and we got everybody's vote. And it got 81 votes in the House. And with respect to testing, I worked very hard to make sure we kept the annual assessment, because I think that's incredibly important to be able to show growth or lack of growth of kids in this country, especially kids living in poverty. But I had an amendment that caps the amount of testing. It says that states will cap the amount of testing, and if it doesn't say to how much, but it just says states have to cap it. And if a district goes beyond what the state's cap, they have to explain to moms and dads why they're doing that, which is a way of trying to drive a discussion about accountability versus teaching and learning. I think we're over-testing. I've got 3 daughters in the Denver Public Schools, and I think we're testing too much. And for accountability purposes, to answer your question precisely, from the federal government, I think I need all I need to know with 4 hours of testing a year on reading and math. I don't need to know anything beyond that from Washington to be able to see right direction, wrong direction. If I'm in a school in Denver and I really want to know what kids are doing, I'm going to need more of that, but it's not going to be what comes from the federal government. It's going to be what that school decides. With respect to the Common Core, which you also asked about, when I'm in a conversation with people and they're saying, well, you hate Obamacare and Obama and you and all this stuff, what I say to people is I have 3 daughters in the Denver Public Schools, which is true. And they are being taught to what we call the Colorado Assessment Standards. And the minute you, hater of the core, are willing to show up with a more rigorous set of standards than that, I'm willing to have a conversation with you about changing the standards they're being taught to. But if all you're going to do is come and criticize and say that somehow my kids don't have the right to know that they're being taught to an international set of norms, there's not much utility in having the conversation. I'm so sorry this has become as politicized as it has become. I think in part that's the fault of very lousy implementation on reforms that relate to the Common Core and relate to testing. You know, we have certainly not gotten everything perfect in Denver. We haven't. And it's gotten better since I left. But we have to learn from our mistakes, and we have to admit it when we make mistakes and then correct it and make it better. People like your daughter, you know, when I can inform this conversation, when I got to DPS, it felt like we were already engaged in a reform, and we had already made positive steps before I got there. We definitely had. But to me, it felt like a one-way game of telephone where the district office was sending out signals to the schools, but they were being received in very different ways from this school and that school, and there was no way for the teachers to respond, really, to have a feedback loop. And so I see Les here, my president, Les Woodward, who hired me against his better judgment. But I remember telling him that I was going to meet with every faculty in the school district and start every day with 15 of our principals. And that's actually what we did. And, you know, we went, for example, to a standard-based report card while I was there. We moved away from the grade A, B, C, and D, and instead said, here are standards, and this is the way we're going to meet them. And at some point during the faculty meetings that I had, teachers said, Michael, this is ridiculous. We used to be able to print out our report cards when kids and their parents would come for meetings, but now it's done by the central office, which is something I had no idea had happened as a result of the transition. And we were able to immediately change that and respond to the teachers that, you know, to their voices. We need more of that in our reform. You know, we need more of that in reform across the country, because otherwise the whole thing is going to come crashing down. I'm sorry for that long-winded answer. I've thought about it a little bit, though.
Good morning, Senator Bennet.
Good morning.
Question around colleges, affordability. I know President Obama has talked about maybe some 2-year community college. There's also student debt that a lot of folks are getting. Where do you see college going? How does it become accessible, affordable?
Let me try to do this much more quickly. In 1976 or so, if you got a Pell Grant, it covered roughly 76% of the average cost of college. Today it's 20%. Today, if you are in the bottom quartile of income earners in the country, if your family is, the average cost of college after student grants are considered will cost you 85% of your net income, whereas if you're in the top quartile, it's 15% of your net income. Ask yourself whether that would be material in terms of being able to finish a 4-year degree. I think we have to change the entire structure of the federal student loan and grant program so that it's incentivizing universities to hold costs down. We don't do that at all today. In fact, it's the reverse. We've incentivized universities, which we can't outsource, although if at the rate we're going, we'll find a way to do it, because it simply is not affordable anymore. I think that's one very important thing that we've got to do. Lamar Alexander, who's the chair of the HELP committee, I mentioned him earlier, and I have a bill that takes the FAFSA form, which is the federal financial aid form. I see some nodding heads here. That is about 120 questions long. It consumes, it's estimated, 50,000 jobs worth of time a year in this country to fill it out. We take it from 120 questions to 2 questions, because the testimony in front of our committee was that that's all you needed, family size and family income, and we could do the rest with the tax form. And we consolidate in that bill the subsidized loan program and the unsubsidized loan program at the federal level, and use the savings from that to fund year-round Pell Grants, because today, ridiculously, students cannot use Pell in the summertime. I mean, if you're going to school over here and you could use it in the summer, you'd be able to get out faster and you'd be able to get out cheaper. And that's, I think, what we also need to figure out how to do. And then as a state, we need to have a real conversation about whether we're willing to support higher education or not. I mean, in the 1970s, if you lived in Colorado, the state covered roughly 75% of the cost of your tuition, and you had to come up with 25%. Today, that's flipped, and even more so. Those of you that have kids here in the schools know that. To me, the worst thing I hear in my town halls is when somebody comes in and says, we cannot afford to send our kid to the best college they got into. I mean, I can't think of anything that's more at war with who we think we are than that. And we should be clear about this. I mean, what's happened is that programs like Medicaid and our prison programs have crowded out the spending that we do for higher education. And as a state now, I think the last time I checked, we were something like 49th in the country in terms of our support for higher education. This is at a time, by the way, sorry, one last thought. When George Bush, the father, this is not a partisan observation, it's a temporal one, I'm sorry, the son became president, we led the world in the production of college graduates. The United States led the world. Today we are 16th in the world. So do we want to be 32nd in the world? Do we want to be 48th in the world? Or are we going to get this figured out? We got to get it figured out.
We've actually got 11 new young people starting our program today, ages 18 to 24, or 18 to 22, I'm sorry, and 9 of the 11 don't have a high school or GED completion coming in. Do you have any thoughts on supporting our kids coming out of foster care and supporting the youth corrections, just as far as that, even achieving that GED or high school?
My only thought is you, honestly. Honestly, it's true. It's true because this is one of there are numerous complicated transitions that kids or young people make in our community, and they fall through the cracks. And this is one of those most profound transitions of all. And we need, as a school district, to create more flexibility to be able to respond to your efforts to transition people. I mean, I went back when I was superintendent, we never got this done. I don't know, Rosemary, if it has been done since. We didn't have a school for kids to study at night, And I had kids who couldn't afford not to work. Their families needed them to work, and they had to work during the day. And I know that, I would meet them, and had they had a place to go at night to study, they would, because they were relentless about trying to move their family ahead and move their family forward. But we were still stuck, in a model that says you go to school from 7 o'clock until 3 o'clock, which makes as much sense as having a school year that goes from, September until May, which makes absolutely no sense. I've not noticed a lot of farmland around here, which is why that calendar is what it is. So I guess the only thing I would say on our side is much more flexibility to be able to deal with the individual needs of students like the ones that you described. Let me just look on this side of the room. This is the quiet side of the room. Yes, and then.
Senator, I'm interested in your thoughts about the school finance formula in our state as the way we fund our public schools. I visited a high school in Brighton, up in Brighton 27J, and learned that the mill levy, the local contribution above the state finance formula, is about $55 a kid there. It doesn't even buy a textbook.
Right.
And the superintendent there was telling me that in neighboring Boulder, that same local figure is maybe $2,000 a kid. I'm sure you know better than I do what that is in Denver public schools. Just wondering your thoughts about that kind of inequity. And we've had a couple failed efforts at the state to modernize the school finance formula.
So as I stand here, I'm forgetting the name of the author, but it will come to me. He's a very smart guy. He wrote an article as part of a book, but the article was published, I think, in the Atlantic, called "First Kill All the School Boards." No offense to Rosemary or Les. That's how it started. Yeah, I never admitted that when I was working for you. But it talks about the history of how we finance schools, and when we started out in colonial America, it made sense that the property tax was what we used to finance education, because and I'm not going to have a solution here. This is the problem. It made sense because everyone lived in the town. Rich people lived in the town. Poor people lived in the town. If you were wealthier, your property tax was a little higher. If you're poorer, it was a little lower. Everybody sent their kids to school. That was, there was a sense of equality in all of that. And as housing patterns changed over the course of the years, it made less and less sense. So you mentioned some inequality between the school you went to and Brighton. How about this? Chicago Public Schools gets about $6,500 a kid to educate kids in Chicago. Evanston, Illinois, which is right next door, which is a wealthy suburb where Northwestern is, it is $18,000 a kid. $18,000 a kid. And because of the way we finance our schools through that property tax, and also because of the requirements of the federal government. This is supposed to be a civil rights law, the education bill. That's the only reason the federal government's involved in this. Because we have historically required states and districts to report in terms of their expenditures based on average teacher salary, not actual teacher salary. So I'm sorry to do this to you, but here's how this works. And I want you to understand it, because if I get hit by a bus, somebody here will. We all of the reporting, salaries is most of the money we spend in education is on teacher salaries, okay? The school district's average salary is here, right here, right here. But if you're in a high poverty school where your teachers tend to be newer, the actual salary that's being paid is here. Not here, but here. And that school is being charged as though it's paying this salary, but it's paying this salary. More affluent school, the teachers are being paid here. They've been around longer. They're being paid more, but they're being charged as though they're paying here. Again, this is a requirement of federal law that all the districts in the country follow, which means there is a massive subsidy that's running from poor children in this country to wealthy children. We don't understand that, but it's true. People think the incremental money is being spent on poor kids. That's not the way it works. I tried to change this in the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, and I didn't succeed. What I did succeed in doing is forcing states and districts for the very first time to report based on actual teacher salary instead of average, so that we can at least make visible that incredible inequity. We are the only country in the world, we are one of 3 countries in the OECD that spend more money on more affluent kids than we do on poor kids. And if you were imagining that you were trying to close the achievement gap in this country, you would do exactly the opposite of what we're doing. So my answer for this, for the moment, before we think about what the policy choices are in the future, is we just need much more transparency so people can see where the actual expenditures are going. And to understand it, it's not just about salary, it also is about pensions, and which are invisible to the community. We have to make them more visible. This is a fundamental inequity in our system, and it's the reason why we got to keep working on this stuff. We are so far from having a system of education in the United States that's unshackling us from income inequality. I mean, and I can't. I say to my friends in D.C. who say that we should have no redistribution of wealth of any kind in this country, that if that's your view, please go out and make sure that we've got early childhood education for every single American child. Make sure we've got a high-quality K-12 school for every American child, and make sure that everybody who can get into college is able to afford to go without a staggering debt on the back end of that. And then I'll agree with your plan. I'll take that deal. I would take that deal if we had an education system that actually worked and promoted the kind of opportunity that we need.
You think you could take one more
Okay.
question for this one?
switch topics for a moment. I'm Carol Hildebrand, practice immigration law.
I don't know anything about any other topic. It's not fair.
I appreciate the intense effort you and at least 8 of your colleagues put in on immigration
Yeah.
reform. And I'm just curious at this stage in Congress, between the House and the Senate, how that discussion about where the country ought to go, what kind of legislation we now need.
Well, thank you. So I was part of the Gang of Eight, so-called Gang of Eight, that John McCain doesn't like that term. He likes to call it the Group of Eight. So he doesn't want to be a gangster. But that spent 8 months locked in a room negotiating this deal, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. And I just want to say a couple things about that. I mean, first of all, it was by far the best experience that I've had as a member of the Senate. This is how I imagine the Senate should work, and that senators that represent us should work together. You know, in that room, it was not a debate. We didn't sit there saying, okay, we will give you border security in order to have a pathway to citizenship, or we'll have a pathway to citizenship in order to have border security. It was Republicans saying to us, you can't possibly agree to that because the AFL-CIO will go crazy. Let's do it this way. And it was Chuck Schumer saying to Republicans, you can't possibly agree to that because if you do, the chamber will go crazy. And what I mean by that is it was people working through a deal for the benefit of the country without making coarse political trades, but trying to decide what the right thing to do was. In other words, pathway to citizenship felt like a normative good, and securing our border felt like a normative good, and those were both things that I knew people in Colorado supported because we had developed the Colorado Compact before I was even sitting at that table, which was a set of principles around immigration reform. There are a lot of things that are passed in Washington that are lousy pieces of legislation that represent horse trading and the worst kinds of compromises and short-sightedness. This bill is the opposite of that, in my opinion. And by the way, it is the opposite. It is the only bill that's been passed by either house that actually does do something about border security and internal security for our country, which we need to take care of. So my hope is that whoever is elected president of the United States, that they will take up this piece of legislation that already passed with more than 70 votes, or almost 70 votes in the Senate, and that they'll get the House of Representatives to act on it. The House, for all of these months and now more than years, has said that they would pass immigration legislation, but they wanted to do it step by step. And since the time we passed our bill until now, the only legislation they've passed has been anti-immigration legislation to take away the ability of dreamers to be able to stay here in this country and get an advanced degree, as an example. And I'll just say to my friends here that are Republicans that as long as Donald Trump is representing the position of the Republican Party on this issue, it's going to be very hard for the Congress to move this forward, and it's going to be very hard for Republicans to elect a president. I mean, what he is talking to, the points that he is making, and I want to just, before I leave, make this point, because I've heard more than a few people say to me in the last couple weeks or so that he's speaking to something that is, important in America, and these are voices that are being heard in America. It's not true. There are some people that feel that way, that are that anti-immigrant. But the vast majority of people in Colorado, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, actually want us to solve this problem. And I know that not just based on polling, but the conversations that I've had for 6 years. Some of the most ardent supporters of fixing this broken immigration system are incredibly Republican farmers and ranchers in this state who may never vote for me, but know that their livelihood depends on our fixing this. For them, this isn't about talking points on the cable television at night. This is about a way of life that they think is going to disappear if we don't actually fix this. So, unfortunately, because of the way the politics has worked, we're now going to have to go back and rebuild the coalition that we had to pass it in the Senate, to get it back through the Senate again and again through the House. But I'm absolutely committed to doing everything I can do to make sure we do that. I mean, two of the things that set us apart from the rest of the world, when you see the mayhem that's going on in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, is that we are a nation that's committed to the rule of law, and we are a nation of immigrants. And almost no other country in the world can say that. We can say that. We can say that. And we need to get back to that. So I want to thank the United Way for all of your work in this area as well, and I got to get out of here. Thank you for having me.
I think you can see why we're so very honored to have the senator with us and his passion for the issues that United Way stands for. But before he goes, he is going to do something very special for us. General Tabor and Kay, would you join us up here for one moment? This was the flag that was flown over the Capitol. So I am very pleased and very honored to have the senator here to say that this accompanying United States flag was flown in your honor, Dale, over the Colorado State Capitol building on August 24th in honor of your 21 years of service to the United States and your 30 years of service to this country. We are so very proud of you. Congratulations and thank you very, very much. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I get to talk a few more moments about our friend, but we did not want to miss that. So I almost made it, Dale, without sobbing, but that's so. I really would like to talk to you about our friend Dale Tabor. And as many of you know, Dale and his partner in crime, Ben Lewis, came to Mile High United Way 21 years ago with the intent of spending just a very short time, just a little bit of time, to help us to reach out to our community. Dale and Ben worked so closely together that I can tell you that on more than one occasion, I heard each of them answer to the other's name, no matter who it was. And I will tell you, it took me almost 6 months to figure out who was which one, and sorry, Kay, who was married to which one as well. Over the past 21 years, literally, tens of thousands of donors at company presentations, over breakfasts, during cocktail receptions, Dale driving to wherever he had to drive through to go there, have heard our mission through Dale's voice and through Ben's voice as well. When Ben retired 2 years ago, I have to tell you, it struck fear in all of our hearts, and then we were convinced that Dale was going to be right behind him. And I can tell you that Jennifer Stokes spent a lot of time saying, Dale's going to retire, what are we going to do? Dale's going to retire, what are we going to do? But we got 2 more amazing years, Dale, from you. We love hearing Dale's story about marrying the prom queen and on recounting his many, many adventures across the world. And you have not experienced a Mile High United Way event until you've heard Dale sing a song or an ode to a coworker. But as much of a joy as he is to be around, Dale's impact extends so much further. He has reached out to so many of you in this room, and you are sitting here today because of him, to share our work, to engage you in our mission, to introduce you to those whose gifts have benefited. He is a professional in every sense of the word, and we all strive to have his charisma, his honor, and his ethics. Dale, in so many ways for us, is the spirit of Mile High United Way. Donors, volunteers, and his team consider him a great friend. We consider you a mentor. and we consider you family, Dale and Kay. Without you, I think we would have been very lost the last few years. So expect Jennifer and Chelsea and me to be showing up at your door, begging for Kay's peppermint cake and some wisdom. And while we were here, we would like to extend a very special welcome to Dale's wife, Kay, and to all of his family members who are here with us. Kay continues to be a wonderful and will be part of our Mile High family. She welcomes us into her absolutely beautiful home every Christmas. For me, Kay, and for many of us, Christmas is at your home. She just makes it very special. So I don't know how you begin to say to somebody thank you who spent their whole life and their whole career serving other people, serving their country, and in the past 21 years, serving this community. So Kay, thank you for your amazing gift to us. Thank you for sharing Dale with us. And so we have just a little something for you, Kay. Just to say thank you. But as usual, it is the general who should have the last word. Dale, this isn't goodbye for any of us. It's just a new part of the adventure and the journey. So I would be very honored if you would say a few words, but would you please all join me in honoring a truly great patriot and friend, General Dale Tabor.
Thank you. Why would someone who is running a nonprofit hire a guy who all he knew about was flying fighters and dropping bombs and shooting guns? Why would they do that? You know, these two jobs that I have had over these 54 years have been a little different. They have a lot of things in common. You know, the Air Force is an all-volunteer force. And while we don't say that Mile High United Way is an all-volunteer force, those of you who are our volunteers are the heart and soul of this organization and help us every single day by backing us, helping us bring in new members, tell our story, and come to our events to learn and to represent us. So, what's important about these last 54 years, and other than my wife, the Queen of Clyde High School is with us today. I married the Queen, and we moved 19 times in 32 years. And I have to say, she, with Kay Tabor at the helm of a move, it's gonna get done. And I honor her for that and for our life together and for our kids and our grandkids and step-grandchildren whose lives we enjoy today. Thank you. When you look at organizations, you know, whether they're, and you look at, let's say, the military, very controlled. You got regs, you got uniforms, everybody knows everybody's status, how much they make, what their job is. It's a very controlled environment. When you look at a nonprofit who depends on volunteers and people to provide you the gifts that they do for the community. It's not very well controlled because the volunteers and the donors are the heart of it. And let's face it, some do it better than others. The ones here today I see some faces that I haven't seen in a while, and I see some faces that have been key to my success here, and I thank you for coming today. But there is a real difference in those two jobs. Sir, I am new cadet Tabor 868K. That meant that I had my chin run in at the Air Force Academy, and I was the 868th person to enter the academy. Now there are over 40,000 of them, but I was fortunate to be in an early class, a very small class at the Air Force Academy, and to graduate from there 4 years later. And I got to fly fighter jets. Oh my, what a great experience, flying fighter jets. In '61, when I came into the service, the wall went up in Berlin, and the Cold War started. So Kay and I accepted an assignment in England, and I started flying fighters in support of our allies in the Cold War, in support of NATO. And while not many people think about it, that included atomic weapons. And I have had atomic weapons loaded on my airplane. I have never flown with one, I have never dropped one, but that tells you how serious it was at that time. Then came Vietnam. That was my time to go to combat. And it was, frankly, a great experience in some respects. I flew 223 missions in 1 year, and that's when you're glad you're in the Air Force and you have so much respect for the Army and the Marines that we are supporting with our close air support. I became a test pilot to fly 2 airplanes directed by Congress and testified before Congress as to which airplane I thought the Air Force and the nation should buy. And they did. It was a significant opportunity in my life. And while stationed at Lowry, I was on the board of Mile High United Way. And you could say, well, there's the segue. And in many cases it was. The next chapter in my life and our life is not to move 19 times. We moved 1 time. But there were no uniforms. I remember the first meeting I went to, I showed up on time, and the person who called the meeting was not even there. And I said, you know, this is different. Let me tell you, as a general officer, you close the door on time, and you don't want to be the person walking in after the door is closed. Unless, of course, you've told someone ahead of time you're going to be late. That's not something. So I learned. And I know that a lady named Janice Kirchville, who hired me along with Mike Durkin, then they took a chance. They really did. I'd never ask anybody for money. And when Mike Durkin said, I want you to run this Tocqueville Society. And I said, I'll do it under one condition, and that is that you allow me to market tax credits. And that's the start of tax credits. It's the start of a lot of things. And the best thing that I did was to get Brad Bussey to be our Tocqueville chair. And man, he did a terrific job. Next thing, we had Brad make a match of $1 million for new and increased giving, and the Tocqueville took a tremendous leap. It had 39 members when I started, and that was the start of our movement toward the 400 that we have now. I worked with a lot of folks, and I'm going to mention a few, and if I miss someone, why, I apologize, but I worked with Del Hawk, and most of you know Del Hawk. Joe Wagner. I saw Joe the other day, and he came to see our building. A gentleman named Jerry Lewis that you don't see very much, but he is the one that went with me to get Brad's commitment for what we were doing here at United Way and then become the chairman. Worked with a gentleman called Jim By, who was a great inspiration for those early folks who were involved in Tocqueville. Worked with John Nelson. John just lost his wife about 2 weeks ago, and I don't know, are you here today, John? I know he's coming to another event. A gentleman named Brad Butler, who came from Cincinnati, and a lady named Kate Paul. You all know Kate Paul. She has been so supportive of me, and I really appreciate that. And last but not least, a gentleman who's here today named Jim Kimsey, who has supported us and me for a long time. So if I missed you, I'm sorry. And I had two great CEOs, Mike Durkin, Christine Bonero, both of whom let me do my thing. And if you've been around United Way very long, you'll know that my thing was my thing. In the business of real estate, they say location, location. In the business of nonprofit, it's called relationships. Relationships. That's how people get involved, is through relationships. And whether you're in the for-profit or the nonprofit business, relationships are the key. I had a lot of opportunities as a result of relationships, and there's one great opportunity that we are all so fortunate to have, and that is that we are Americans. We have the greatest relationship of all, and we need to be proud of it and guard it and know that we are so lucky. Thank you.
I don't think General Tabor could have said it better. We are so very, very lucky, Dale. To all of you who joined us this morning, thank you. to Mike and Julie, don't cry, Julie, to Mike and Julie, who are doing such an extraordinary job leading us and following in your footsteps and with your guidance. Dale, and to our chairman of the board who was here, or still is here, David Eves, for your leadership, to all of our board members, but to all of you as Tocqueville members, or those of you who are considering becoming Tocqueville members. You make a difference in this community, and I am very proud to be in your company. Thank you all so much for being here this morning.